Well, I'm delighted to be here because it's always wonderful to be at leadership. Is this on? Am I talking okay on the mic? Okay. Because it's always great to be at the Leadership Institute and with Morton, but today is a particularly good day since we made a lot of progress. And I want to talk about what it means, the fight over the narrative, because guys on the other team are going to explain this. This wasn't a rejection of any of the left's ideas. It was either a personal rejection of Obama, whoever he was. We didn't meet him. And they want to move on. And you're seeing already they're leaving Obamacare out of the list of things that people were concerned about. They included under economy. And we need to make sure both we have the correct narrative in talking to the American people, explaining what we're doing, but also that we learn the right lessons, because there are a lot of good lessons that will lead to greater victories. First thing that I think happens, we want a majority in the Senate, and that means something very big. It means it'll be easier to keep the Senate in 16, 18, and 20. And the reason for that is Harry Reid was this protective mother hen who never let any of his Democrat senators vote on anything problematic. We had to win elections in 10, 12, and 14 against people who made very skinny targets because they had one vote, which is a pretty helpful one, Obamacare. But make a list of the other awful votes that Democrat senators ended up casting. I talked to several folks, particularly from the traditional values part of the coalition, who said we don't have any votes to rate because Reid never allowed any to take place, and so we can run away. We know that guy is bad, but that's not the same thing as on Tuesday he voted for a bad bill that let us show you. So what will happen is we will now have dozens of such votes. And the other team did have some votes that they threw marbles at our feet, or what they thought would be problematic for us. But we actually have large marbles to throw at their feet. Every one of them is going to have to vote. And maybe it'll be a vote to filibuster. But we just have somebody stand outside the door and say, today's vote is on this. It's called a filibuster, but it's really about X. And then that goes into the ad when you then talk about each of these votes. So we are in a much stronger, people say, 16 is going to be hard to hold the Senate. Much easier to do well in the Senate when we write the script of what people voted on. Now, does that mean the House votes something, the Senate votes something, the President will have to sign it, we win everything? No. Okay? That's not the way it works. And we're still going to have to deal with filibuster. We're still going to have to deal with the President's veto. But there are a number of things that we can get past. There will be progress. I think when you do politics, you have to have bifocal vision. You have to say, we're going to the mountains, and this is the vision thing, and this is where we're going. And the big picture is, right, the Ryan budget plan, which drops the cost to government 50 years from now from 40% of GDP down to 16% of GDP by reforming government to cost less. We passed that. I'm going home to write murder mysteries, and because you really turn the ship of state around in a way that's very difficult for the other team to alter. That's big picture. The President would veto that. The President would veto anything that looks that big. But then we have to look at our feet and not trip as we keep moving towards the mountains, bifocal vision. And then we have to do that thing they do in House of Cards. We got to talk to the base and our supporters and say, we're the vision thing, and today we're crossing the street. I remember when Gingrich would get in trouble because he'd be talking about the vision, then all of a sudden he and Dick Armey and the other guys would talk about, and today we're going to have this vote, and wait a minute, I thought we were going to the mountains, and people need to hear both. You got to go back and forth. So constantly we need to remind people our goal is to get rid of Obamacare. Today we're going to nick it, and it's going to bleed a bit, and we're still going to get rid of Obamacare, and tomorrow we'll nick it again, and eventually we're going to beat it as quickly as we can. But if we don't remind ourselves, you have to keep turning to the camera and explaining this isn't everything we want, this is part of where we're going, you can end up with a very frustrated base that thinks you betrayed them because you said you were going to and you didn't yesterday. That's the Senate. But mostly on big issues, we have a Republican House and Senate and a Democrat president, and neither can make either do anything. Somebody can make a mistake and misplace their foot, but you have two sumo wrestlers exactly the same size, exactly the same skill, exactly the same weight for 2 years doing this, and nobody gets knocked outside the red circle. And so what do? One, don't get knocked over. That's progress, okay? Don't let them do anything bad. And the action, and then have the votes to embarrass the other team so we can beat them in the next election. But I wrote several times during this election cycle that the most important races were Wisconsin's governorship and the governorship in Kansas. And I believe that those two governors, and there's some others who've done some interesting things too, their elections are not only great. We get 4 more years of a great Governor Walker, 4 more years of a great Governor Brownback. It's more than that. Each of those people did things that, if continued and shared into the other states, to weaken the Democratic Party, strengthen the modern conservative and liberty movement, and allow us to win more and more. Because we have to win a majority of the electoral votes in 2016 or 2020, right? We're going to have the House until 2022, and if we're competent, we can hold the Senate during that period and strengthen from where we are. But we got to win the presidency in 16 or 20 and pass the Ryan bill. Okay, do the big ticket things that we can when you have all 3 parts of government. You can make a lot of progress when you align those together. Half of the federal government steals 20% takes 20% of everything Americans make and spends it. Half of that, 10% of GDP, half of the federal government came into being because of 6 bad years in American history. 34 to 38 and 64 to 66. During those 2 periods of Democrat supermajorities, they rammed through Social Security, unemployment insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, little acorns designed to grow into large trees, just as the Ryan plan is this thin wedge which goes in and reforms government in ways that inevitably make it significantly smaller than it would be otherwise. 6 years. How come we became a European social democracy? Because we lost a series of elections, not over and over again with American people saying that's what we want, but a couple times when they punched through. If we're going to win the presidency, we got to be winning the presidency in states that we're not now winning, starting like Wisconsin. And Bertolt Brecht, the wonderful left-wing thug writer in the 50s, was embarrassed because in 1953 the East Germans had a workers' revolt. And you're not supposed to have a workers' revolt in the workers' paradise. This is very embarrassing to the communists. And somebody stuck a microphone in front of him and said, "So what's going on?" And he said, "Well, clearly we have to elect a new people." I've looked this up in Wikipedia to see if he had his tongue in his cheek there, but it doesn't say. He just said it. Okay, so that's as good as he could do at the time, or there was some self-knowledge showing. We can, in the United States, elect a new people. And by that, I mean we change the laws so the nature of the people shifts and they become more open to the advocates of liberty. A couple suggestions or examples. 30 years ago, people went to prison for homeschooling. In all 57 states, it was not legal to homeschool. You were a truant, right? Today, in all 50 states, some say, it's largely legal and lightly regulated, and 2 million American kids are being homeschooled. 10 million American young people have been homeschooled at some point during their life. This is Mike Ferris's work and leadership. Somebody who gets a note from the school district saying, "Send your kid to this school, thank you very much, shut up, bye." And somebody who says, "I think I'll take on myself the responsibility of educating my own kid." Can I get some water? Those are two, thanks. Those are two very different human beings. If you make available to somebody the right, the freedom, the ability to educate their own kids, the person who wants to take that away is their deadly enemy. And the modern Democratic Party is one of the major paying customers are the labor unions in the public sector of education, teachers and all the 60% of people in education who aren't teaching. And they know that if the Democrats win, they will lose that freedom. We got the first shall issue concealed carry law passed in 2011. in 1987 in Florida, 1987. In 2006, 2007, there were 4.5 million people with concealed carry permits in the United States. 41 states now have concealed carry. 11 million Americans have a concealed carry permit. 11 million. That is 1 out of 20. That is 5%. You walk down the street, not in D.C., but in civilized countries and states, and 1 out of 20 may have a gun in her purse, in the car, in the small of their back, okay? The person who says, I'm really glad I pay taxes because I get a lot of government services for my taxes, and if I was attacked, the government would send people out and they'd draw a white chalk mark all around my body. And that would be very helpful, and the money I pay in taxes is well spent. That's one voter. The voter who says, I don't intend to be a victim, I'm going to carry a gun, I'll be responsible for my kids, my life, and my own security, is a different human being. That is not the same person as 20 years earlier. It's a different person. If you have $5,000 worth of stock, on average in the United States, like a 401k IRA, $5,000 worth of stock makes you 18% more Republican, less Democrat. That's true. It's different by group, but rich people, poor people, white people, black people, government workers, non-government workers, retired people, old people, young people, everybody gets more Republican with share ownership. And all you need is you don't have to be Rockefeller. $5,000 worth of stock, all of a sudden, the news is different to you. The stock market means something else. Taxes on capital gains and dividends and businesses are a different project. So it changes the nature of who someone is. There's one group, one demographic that doesn't get better with share ownership. They're already largely Republican. This is women who earn more than $75,000 a year. So if you know any women like this, don't give them any stock, because it doesn't do any good at all. But if you buy them a gun, that's much more helpful. And if it isn't one of the really cool 50 caliber jobs, it's less than the 5,000. So our job is to create the conditions in the states, state by state, because state laws can change these, okay? The counterpart of creating more of us is to create fewer of them. What did Scott Walker do? What did Scott Walker do that, having been the entire labor union movement, jumped on his head at least 3 times? I mean, he's had more elections up there where they kept trying to knock him out, take out his Supreme Court justice, take out his state Senate majority, take out him. And they are wise to do that. They were wise. I had a fellow who sends his daughter to the same school my kids go to, is a big labor union thug, and he was heading up this last weekend. He said, we're all going to Wisconsin. It's our top priority. They had to have Wisconsin, and for other reasons, they had to have Florida. They lost both. Okay. In Wisconsin, what Scott Walker did was the following. He passed a law, Act 10, which says, his original plan was, here's what I'll do. I'll pass a law that says no public sector unions. How about that? Well, hey, State Senate President, hi, Speaker of the House, I have this plan. Panic. Thank you very much. Absolutely no. That wouldn't happen. Okay. You can, the one book written by a politician about himself that I would recommend is his autobiography. I actually read it the whole way through. It reads like an action murder mystery, even though you know how it's going to end. Because he tells you every dead end he walked down. He started to do this, that didn't work, and then we did this, and we did this. Instead of going with what he finally did and going, my first brilliant idea was, and then explain how he went from success to success at all times. The bill says if you're a public sector worker, and he exempted cops and firemen, they were going to exempt prison guards, but then they realized the National Guard. They could replace the prison guards with National Guard. So they could let everybody go nuts on them there. They just didn't need the cops and the firemen to. So they were set off to the side. Didn't buy them any labor peace, by the way. The person who tried to take out his lieutenant governor was the head of the firemen's union, even though they weren't touched by this. But set that aside, and he said, now, nobody can be required to pay dues, and no government entity will withhold dues for the union. If a teacher making $50,000 in Wisconsin pays 2% of her salary, his or her salary, to the union in dues, $50,000, $1,000, $1,000. Now, if they take that out in little pieces out of your paycheck and you never see it, well, you know, okay. But when they come and say, gimme, please, gimme, please, they have to ask, but they have to make you. You know, you can go get your $1,000 dues. Here's a baseball bat. Go at it. But what you cannot do is you cannot require them by law to do that. Then they they said unions cannot negotiate on pensions. Why? Because local elected officials, school board members and so on, get mau-maued by the teachers union and the people in the press. Don't you like teachers? You're not showering them with cash. And then they put all of the higher spending into pensions, which will show up in 20 or 30 years from now, and I will no longer be responsible for this mess. It will not be my fault. You know, somebody else will deal with that. Well, the somebody else and the sometime else is now all across this country. No more doing that. No negotiating on work rules, which was the big thing. Nobody's focused on it. The reason they had to do this was they were short $2 to $3 billion. I mean, you talk to these Republican governors that were up this time. The D's who walked out the door left them with these monumental deficits, debts, promises to pay that they had no intention of following through. And then they got cabinet offices. We ought to ask our senators when somebody says, I'd like to run a cabinet office, to ask them, what did their state look like, Sebelius, when you were governor and when you walked out the door? She left it with $700 million worth of debts and less than $1,000 in the relevant bank account. Okay? If we'd had that conversation with her on TV during the hearings, you wouldn't have been picking on her, and I don't think she could have gotten through, and it would have been a mistake because she wouldn't have screwed up Obamacare as well. Anyway, well, that's a different thought. Maybe we let some of them slide through. He had a $2 or $3 billion problem over 2 years, budget problem, and the way he could fix it was either slash everything across the board. What he did instead was he reduced state payments to local governments by that much, and at the same time told them you have complete flexibility on hiring and firing. No more teacher tenure. If somebody wants to work here, if you need somebody to work here half a day and there half a day, you can tell them to do that. You don't have a labor contract that gets in the way of that. They saved more money through that flexibility than they were denied in state funding. State funding for local governments pays for the ridiculous contracts that organized labor extorts at the local level. Then they get the state to pay for the ridiculous, the town and the city. Oh, you don't have to pay for that. We'll get the state to give you the money. Oh, okay, then I sign the contract. Here you go. No negotiating on pensions. No negotiating on pay beyond the rate of inflation. Up to the rate of inflation, you can negotiate. After that, vote of the people. I'm sorry, I forgot one other thing. Every year there's going to be a vote by every member of the union. Now, you don't have to be a member, but the people who remain union members have to have a vote. Do you want to keep the union? At least 500 locals have ceased to exist. We don't know how many exactly because they don't write in and say we're not here anymore. But at least 500 that they could ID. Everybody who walked away and didn't join the union or maybe stayed in the union but didn't pay dues is $1,000 out of the other teams. Okay, we're talking maybe $60 to $100 million a year lost to organized labor and the left in one state, and that will grow. Just as with concealed carry, when people start to do concealed carry and then they ask their friends ask about it, and then if it's safe, then more people do it. Can you really not pay the dues? Can I really join the union? I mean, I know the law said that and everything, but my labor union boss sort of said I really have to. And this guy got reelected, and it's going to become clear. I think you're going to see the fall off on union membership stronger now that people understand this is to stay. What if they'd lost the election, then all your friends would come and mau you for having walked out the door? Now everybody can walk out the door. So I think this will speed up. Last night, before the election, there were 24 states with a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate. 24. Half the country, 50% of our population, lived in a red state. The other team had 13 states with a quarter, 80 million, just over a quarter of the nation's population. We had half the population, they had a quarter. We had 24 states, they had 13. Last night, meaning governor in both houses, California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, states like that, okay? As of this morning, they lost Massachusetts, Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, West Virginia, and New York as states where they had unified government. Now, a Republican governor or the Republican House or Republican Senate can say no. So they can't do anything they want in 13 states with a quarter of the population, and they gain none there. We lost one, Pennsylvania. We lost the governor. But then we picked up a whole bunch of state legislatures also. We have 23 states right now. Oh, I'm sorry. No, Nevada. We still have 25. We got both houses in Nevada last night. We have 25 states. I wish Nevada was as big as Pennsylvania, but it's another story. We got 25 states where if the Republicans sit in a room and agree, they can pass Act 10 of Wisconsin. We can take hundreds of millions, billions of dollars every election cycle out of the hands of the left, and we can do it between now and 216 and between now and 220. So one of the things you do is create more of you. The other thing you do is create fewer of them. And the lucky thing for us is all we have to do is change the rules to honest. How about, and you're going to see all of those laws that were delayed. I mean, we won these last elections last night with a whole bunch of our voter ID not thrown out, but delayed. What the Supreme Court would do is, oh, you didn't give them enough time. Okay, next election in Wisconsin, it'll be there. Okay, I voted in D.C. and when I handed in my, oh, you don't need that. I used to have a nanny when my kids were really small. I have a stack of the absentee ballots that arrive for her every year. They do not police those things like they tell you they're going to. So we have opportunities to create more of us through tax policy. I think we could have 10 or 15 states do what Act 10 did and Walker did across the country and kneecap the left. I mean, how many billionaires do you need on the left to replace $60 million missing in Wisconsin? That's not $60 million one time. That's every year, okay? So there is a huge, huge drop-off in their ability to fundraise. Same thing happens with tort reform. Every time we get tort reform, we make the Democratic Party poorer. 75% of the money that goes into the Texas Democrat Party is labor union dollars. 75%. Do tort reform, more tort reform, you defund the left. We're not taking anything away. We're just saying you can't steal stuff anymore. You can't do that. And that can cut off their resources. And they outspent us this time. And it's good to win an election when you're outspent, so you don't worry, what if we annoy them and they get really excited and spend a lot of money? Well, they just did. And we still beat them. Next state is Kansas. Kansas has done two things that I believe are models for the other states. Had Brownback lost last night, it would have been difficult to sell these. You want some of this. The dead guy over there liked it. You want to say, try this. It worked for him. He's still standing. He did two things. The first was he confronted the pre-Reagan Republican state Senate in Kansas. Kansas is north of the Mason. I don't even know. It's north of the Mason-Dixon line. It was a union state. And there were 13 of 40 Lincoln Republicans in the state Senate. Lincoln Republicans meaning if you put a microphone and said, why are you Republican? They say, well, Lincoln was, and during the war we were with the North, and so I'm a Republican. Do you have any fixed opinions on taxes and labor unions and trialists? No. No, I'm a Republican because, and then he goes back to Potawatomi. And you laugh at him, but then there's a little old lady in Mississippi who agreed with Ronald Reagan on everything and voted for George McGovern because Sherman had been unpleasant to Atlanta recently. We do now have every state in the Confederacy with both houses of the legislature Republican. Okay, so that little old lady was quicker on the uptake than the guys in Kansas. They were still in the middle of the Civil War. And what the Chamber of, I want to live in a state or a city with a Chamber of Commerce like this. The Chamber of Commerce, working with the governor, primaried 13 sitting state senators. 2 quit rather than get beat. 2 survived. Okay? The others were all defeated with serious grown-up candidates, no witches, and just guys who could win a primary and a general and govern as Reagan Republicans, and they all won. 2 got by. 1 sued for peace, rejoined our team. The other lady sits in the corner and drools. And you said, don't be like her. Okay. Now we have a Reagan Republican Senate complete, formed by the governor, and a Reagan Republican House, which had happened over time as well. They'd moved faster. We have a Reagan Republican House, Senate, and governor. They've already passed the following. And so teaching Republicans, if Corbett had done this, he'd still be governor. When he went to the Republicans and they said, we don't want to sell off the Pennsylvania Turnpike and get $12 billion and pave everything that we need paved, because some of our cousins have those corrupt jobs collecting tokens, and we don't want to sell off the 1956 Bulgaria liquor stores that they have in that state, because you can't have privately run liquor stores because somebody might buy liquor at them. And we can't do that because we have and the unions give us money, and we have friends who have those cushy jobs. And so he couldn't do anything. And then all the nice road people said, hey, you promised me you were going to get this money and build roads. I mean, give it to me, and then I'd build roads. And he said, well, they wouldn't let me do that. And they said, that wasn't the deal. You promised us the money. They started gnawing on his ankles. He raised taxes to give them the money. Okay? Had he gone to the Republicans and said, I'm going to run a statewide campaign to beat anyone who won't get us $12 billion to pave the state, and if you want to stand in my way, I will primary you and I will beat you on that issue, and you can tell people it's because your cousin has a corrupt job. Let's go. Okay? And had he done that, he'd have had a better state senate, and he'd still be governor today. So, and I think the same thing happened to the Republican governor, who also wasn't allowed to in Virginia to do what he wanted to do, had to turn around and raise taxes rather than sell the liquor stores because a handful of Republicans couldn't be bothered. Republican governors need to learn, Reagan Republican governors, to go after the guys and move them along, and that you can survive that. Remember, all the national press said, oh, the Republicans in the state don't like him. I did meet the press, and they throw up on the screen, oh, here's some Republicans sitting around at a restaurant talking about how much they don't like him. Those are the guys he beat. They didn't mention that. They just sound like guys who walked in off the street. I'm a Republican. They were former state senators is what they was, because the governor. Second thing he did, and so I hope we will replicate that when we have legislatures who are not with the program. And we do have a bunch of people who switched parties and became a Republican because they go to church and they have guns and they haven't quite got the memo on taxes and spending and stealing stuff for your friends. We got to go. If we tell them, then maybe they'll come along. But you may have to beat a couple of them on the way. Second thing he did was he passed a law that's cut the income tax in the state. So high-tax state's now a lower tax state. 2019, after the scheduled cuts stop, we go to the race to zero. In Kansas, every time revenue comes in more than 2% up from the previous year, all additional money goes to ratcheting down the personal income tax to zero, never ratchets up. If you have a recession, they stop the ratchet down during the recession. With growth recovers, the ratchet goes back down again, okay? With normal growth, these taxes are gone in about 10 years as you phase it out. They intend to be more aggressive on spending restraint. They'll phase it out even faster. That the personal income tax goes to zero, then the corporate income tax goes to zero, then the banking tax goes to zero. And that happens with him just sitting and twiddling his, he doesn't have to pass another law. That's automatic. A dozen states could do that. Ducey, the new governor in Arizona, plans on doing phasing out the income tax. North Carolina is halfway to phasing out the income tax. The next, and because Tillis won, the present governor, who might be a little more reticent to do stuff, will allow us to move forward and go to zero. Arkansas has been talking about this. Oklahoma's, the governor and the legislature both say they want to do this. Louisiana, the governor and the legislature all say they want to do this. They just don't want to do it with him. Okay, they don't like each other. If we could, we'll get it done. They just have to do it without them talking. So we now have models on dismantling. Half of organized labor is in the public sector, half is in the private sector. The half in the private sector is growing. Why? Because the NLRB is run by Obama for the next 2 years. He's got his thumb on the scale and he's cheating. We have not our thumb on the scale. We are being fair on our side, and we can change the unfair rules that they've written for themselves in the public sector union to defund organized labor and then separately trial lawyers. And then we go to zero on taxes, and then every state, all 50 states, have to compete to get the lowest taxes possible. We can change the nature of the electorate. And again, the more people with concealed carry, the more homeschoolers, the more people with share ownership, the more self-employed people, the more independent contractors, the fewer government employees. The counterpart to if you have $5,000 worth of stock, you're 18% more Republican, less Democrat. If you have a government job, you're 10% more D, less R. Have that job for 30 years, you're 30% more D than R. Make $75,000 or more in that year, and you're 30% more D than R. So a job at the town pool won't ruin your kid. But if he stays there long enough, he'll go bad on you. Last thought, and then I'll take some questions, and that is the Republican brand is strong and the Democrat brand is weak, and I bring as Exhibit A the fact that the Democrats did not run on their brand. They ran as Landrieu, Nunn, Carter, Pryor, Udall. They ran as legacy. They ran as aristocrats. They ran as son of, daughter of, Lorene Wallace. Okay, they just, and we beat them all. We'll beat Landrieu. We beat them all. They're trying to run as something other than Democrats. That's why one of the most important things the left does, watch for this group, it's called no labels. We should all run without labels. They even got Mickey Edwards, who's the former Republican legislator, who thinks parties and labels are bad. Okay, first of all, how'd you like to go to a pharmacy? We're the no labels pharmacy. You want some of this? What is it? It's no label. They know we won't take their stuff with their label on it. They know people are more interested in our stuff with our label on it. And one of the things that I consciously did with the Taxpayer Protection Pledge was to drive it so that we have ivory percentages of the modern Republican Party who've made that commitment in writing to the American people, to the people of their state, not as Harry Reid and Obama said to me personally or to Americans for Tax Reform. If you read the pledge, I promise to the people of my state and to the American people, I'm not going to raise your taxes. It's in writing. And the reason we did that is we branded the modern Republican Party as the party that would not raise your taxes. The one thing you know with 90+% certainty is if you walk into the polling booth dead drunk and you just vote for the guy with the R after his name, he or she will not raise your taxes. They may invade small countries they can't pronounce, but they will not raise your taxes, okay? And that's pretty good for starters. We have to maintain that brand. Every once in a while, we have guys who jump over the fence and have impure thoughts about tax increases. But we can, people can go into a store. Branding is important. You can go in a store and buy a Coke, and you know what's in the Coke, and you don't have to read the label or ask your friends, what's this like? Or ask, proprietor, could I have a taste to see whether I like this Coke? You know what's in the Coke. They have quality control. They brand it. You know what's there. You get home, you're 2/3 through your bottle of Coke, and you look down and there's a rat head in what's left in your Coke. You don't say to yourself, I'm thinking I may not finish all the rest of this bottle of Coke tonight. You take a selfie and you show it to all your friends. And Coke has a problem. One rat head and Coke has a problem because it damages the brand for everyone else, not just for them. Republican elected officials who vote for tax increases are rat heads in a Coke bottle. They damage the brand for everyone else. So we have to protect the brand, but recognize they know their brand isn't good. and they're trying to get these third groups to do no labels. Remember they did the mix-ups, the little three-card Monty thing, where they were running the independent, and he became the Democrat, but he's an independent. You know, who are we voting for when they ran the phony moderate, who knows who he is, senator in Kansas, and then they played this game up with an independent up in Maine, and then they played the same game and still doing it in Alaska on the governor's race. They're moving this stuff around, so you can't, wait a minute, which one's the Democrat? Okay, I don't want him. Okay, they know that. They see that coming, so they're shifting this around. So briefly, we're going to have gridlock in Washington. Our team needs to send people the vision of where we're going, and then day-to-day explain, this is today's struggle. This is this week's fight. We're doing this little stupid tactic thing to get through the day so we can get there. We haven't forgotten about that, and that's how this gets it. Let us tell you why this gets us there. This, you know, I'm for compromise. Compromise means getting to liberty as rapidly as humanly possible, understanding I can't get everything I want immediately. So as fast as we can get there, if I can only get this far today, okay, I got it. That's a compromise, okay? So if I'm in D.C. and I'm trying to get to California and I'm in Missouri, that's a compromise. Missouri is on the way to California. It is not treason to be in Missouri. Well, you said we were going to California. Now we're in Missouri. What's the hell? You're cheating me. No, Missouri is on the way to California. But if, having told everybody I'm going to California from D.C., and my feet are all wet and everybody around me speaking French, that's not compromise. That's losing, okay? So our friends on the left are always, you should compromise. What's the compromise? Raise taxes. No, that's losing. That's not compromising, okay? So we should understand that compromise means going in the right direction more slowly than we might like because there are rocks and people in the other team in the way. Going in the wrong direction is not compromise. It's losing. And questions, thoughts, arguments?